Deep in the Nevada desert, where the sun scorches the earth and visibility stretches for miles in every direction, lies the most secretive and dangerous military training facility in the world. Here, elite forces from around the globe come to face their greatest fears and push beyond every limit they thought they had. This is Red Desert Complex. And what happens here will either forge warriors or break them completely. Before we dive into this incredible story, be sure you subscribe, because what you're about to witness will change everything you thought you knew about military training. The morning heat was already brutal at 5 a.m. as Master Sergeant Jake Morrison watched 30 of the world's most elite soldiers file into the briefing room. These weren't ordinary troops. These were the best of the best. Navy SEALs Delta Force, British SAS, German GSG-9, Russian Spetsnaz. Each representing years of training and countless operations, Morrison had seen thousands of elite soldiers pass through Red Desert, but this group was different. They were here for Exercise Crucible, the most demanding and dangerous training program ever created. Only 60% of participants would complete the exercise, and even fewer would do so without permanent psychological scars. "Welcome to your nightmare," Morrison announced, his voice cutting through the desert air like a blade. "For the next 14 days, you will face scenarios designed to break the strongest minds and test the limits of human endurance. Some of you will quit, others will be carried out, but a few will emerge transformed into something beyond what you thought possible." Captain Sarah Chen of the Navy SEALs studied the faces around her. She had completed Hell Week, survived combat deployments, and earned her place among America's elite warriors. But something about Morrison's tone suggested this would be different. The other operators showed similar expressions, experienced fighters recognizing they were about to face something unprecedented. The first phase, Morrison continued, is called the Gauntlet. You'll navigate 15 miles of desert terrain while being hunted by our opposition force. But here's the catch: the hunters aren't using training rounds. Everything is live ammunition, live explosives, real consequences for every mistake you make. A murmur rippled through the room. Even for elite soldiers, the prospect of live fire exercises pushed the boundaries of acceptable risk. But that was exactly the point. Red Desert was designed to create stress levels that no simulation could match. Lieutenant Hans Mueller of the German GSG-9 raised his hand. "Sir, what are the medical protocols if someone is hit by live fire?" Morrison's smile was cold and professional. "There are trauma teams positioned throughout the exercise area, but understand this: if you take a round, if you trigger an explosive, the injuries will be real. This isn't a game. This is the closest thing to actual combat you can create in a training environment." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. These warriors had all faced real combat, but choosing to enter a live fire exercise where the enemy was trying to actually hurt them was a different kind of courage altogether. Captain Dmitry Volkov of the Russian Spetsnaz leaned forward, his scarred face showing interest rather than concern. "What about the opposition force? Who are they?" Morrison's grin widened. "Former special operations personnel who've been specifically trained for this exercise. They know every inch of this terrain, every hiding spot, every advantage, and they're motivated by a simple fact: for every one of you they eliminate from the exercise, they receive a substantial bonus." This revelation changed everything. The opposition wasn't just playing a role, they were incentivized to hunt down and eliminate every participant. The financial reward meant they would use every skill, every dirty trick to end the exercise for the elite soldiers. Chen found herself calculating odds and scenarios in her mind. 15 miles of open desert against an opposition force that knew the terrain had live ammunition and financial motivation to stop them. The tactical challenges were immense, but that's what made it intriguing rather than terrifying. Phase 2, Morrison continued, is called the Breaking Point. Those who survive the gauntlet will face 48 hours of continuous psychological warfare. Sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, interrogation techniques that push the boundaries of what's legally permissible. We want to see how you function when your mind starts breaking down. The psychological warfare component was what separated Red Desert from other training facilities. While physical challenges tested the body, the mental components. Reached into the deepest parts of a warrior's psyche, finding weaknesses that combat stress might exploit. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres of Delta Force had survived SEER training, but what Morrison described sounded more intense. The combination of physical exhaustion from the gauntlet, followed immediately by psychological warfare, meant no recovery time, no chance to mentally prepare for the next phase. Phase 3, Morrison announced, is called the Crucible. This is where we separate the exceptional from the merely excellent. You'll be given a mission that appears impossible with inadequate resources, limited time, and opposition forces that outnumber you 10 to 1. Success requires not just surviving, but accomplishing an objective that will test every skill you've ever learned. The progression made tactical sense each phase, building on the previous one, creating cumulative stress that would push participants beyond their breaking points. The physical challenges of the gauntlet would exhaust them, the psychological warfare would disorient them, and Crucible would demand peak performance while operating at minimal capacity. One final detail, Morrison added, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Throughout all 3 phases, you'll be monitored by psychological evaluation teams. If at any point you show signs of permanent mental damage, the exercise ends for you immediately. We're here to forge better warriors, not create broken soldiers. This safety measure provided some comfort, but also added another layer of pressure. Participants would need to endure extreme stress while maintaining enough control to avoid triggering. The psychological safety protocols showing weakness, even understandable. Human reactions to extreme stress could result in immediate removal. The briefing concluded with equipment distribution and final medical checks. Each participant received standard combat gear, but with modifications that would make the exercise even more challenging. Limited ammunition, reduced water supplies, and communication equipment that would fail at predetermined intervals. Chen checked her gear methodically, her SEAL training emphasizing preparation over bravado. The M4 rifle was familiar, but carrying only 6 magazines meant every shot would need to count. The GPS would fail after 6 hours, forcing navigation by compass and landmarks. Even the water supply was calculated to create stress 2 liters for what could be a 24-hour exercise in desert heat. Mueller studied the topographical maps, noting the vast distances between potential cover points desert offered. Few hiding places, which meant movement would require careful timing and exceptional awareness. The opposition force's advantage in knowing the terrain would be significant. Volkov cleaned his weapon with mechanical precision, his Russian training emphasizing reliability over advanced technology. He'd operated in similar environments in Afghanistan and Chechnya, but always with the knowledge that his side had superior firepower and support. This exercise stripped away those advantages. Torres reviewed the emergency extraction procedures, noting that calling for help meant automatic failure. Medical emergencies would be treated, but the participant would be removed from the exercise. The protocols were designed to encourage maximum effort while maintaining minimal safety standards. At 0600 hours, the 30 elite soldiers stood at the starting line of the gauntlet. Out! The desert stretched endlessly before them, heat waves already rising despite the early hour. Somewhere in that vast expanse, an opposition force waited with live ammunition and the motivation to end their exercise permanently. Morrison's final words echoed across the starting area. Remember, you're not just representing your units or your countries. You're proving that elite warriors can be forged into something even more dangerous. Those who complete Exercise Crucible will join a very select group of individuals who've proven they can function at peak efficiency under the most extreme stress imaginable. The signal came without fanfare, a simple hand gesture that sent 30 of the world's most dangerous soldiers into the Nevada desert, where they would either discover new levels of capability or learn the hard limits of human endurance. The exercise had begun, and there would be no safety net, no second chances, and no mercy for those who couldn't adapt to the most dangerous training environment ever created. As they moved into the desert, each soldier knew they were entering something unprecedented. This wasn't just training, it was a test of everything they thought they knew about warfare, survival, and themselves. Behind them, the safety of the base camp disappeared into heat waves. Ahead lay 15 miles of desert, where former special operations Soldiers waited with live ammunition and the clear intention to end their exercise through whatever means necessary. The transformation from elite soldier to something beyond had begun. 3 hours into the gauntlet, the desert had already claimed its first victims. Captain Chen watched through her scope as 2 British SAS operators were extracted after triggering a concealed explosive device. The medics worked frantically, but both men would survive with severe injuries that would end their military careers. The message was clear: this exercise had real consequences. The opposition force had been relentless and professional. Sniper fire from concealed positions forced the remaining participants to move in short. Desperate sprints between minimal cover. Every ridgeline could hide a shooter. Every shadow might conceal an ambush. The psychological pressure was immense. Knowing that the next step could trigger an explosion or draw lethal fire, Movement Tier 3 o'clock Mueller whispered into his radio, his German accent thick with exhaustion. 2 shooters elevated position approximately 800 meters. The communication equipment was failing exactly as promised, forcing the scattered participants to rely on brief whispered exchanges when they could manage to link up. Chen adjusted her position, noting how the opposition force used the terrain expertly. They weren't just shooting randomly. They were herding the participants toward predetermined kill zones where multiple weapons could engage simultaneously. Professional. Tactics that showed years of experience in actual combat operations. Volkov had gone to ground behind a cluster of rocks, his Spetsnaz training, serving him well in the hostile environment. He had identified at least 6 opposition positions, but approaching any of them would mean crossing open ground under observation. The tactical situation was deliberately impossible, forcing participants to choose between bad options and worse ones. Torres moved like a ghost, using every piece of micro-terrain to mask his approach toward what appeared to be a communications relay. If he could disable it, the opposition force would lose coordination, allowing the participants to exploit gaps in their coverage, but reaching it meant a 200-meter dash across exposed ground. The heat was becoming a factor as deadly as the opposition force. Desert temperatures climbed past 100 degrees, and the limited water supplies meant careful rationing. Dehydration would slow reactions and cloud judgment, making participants even more vulnerable to the hunters tracking them. Contact front. Chen called softly as muzzle flashes erupted from her left flank. She rolled behind cover as bullets sparked off rocks where she'd been lying. The opposition wasn't using warning shots or training ammunition. These were real bullets, intended to wound or kill anyone careless enough to expose themselves. By hour 6, the GPS systems failed exactly as promised. Navigation became a matter of compass readings and landmark identification, but the desert offered few distinctive features. Several participants made critical errors in direction finding themselves in kill zones where opposition forces waited with prepared positions and interlocking fields of fire. The first psychological casualties emerged as the sun reached its peak. A German GSG-9 operator began showing signs of combat stress, his movements becoming erratic and his communication deteriorating into incoherent whispers. The psychological evaluation team extracted him immediately, but his removal demonstrated how the exercise pushed beyond physical endurance into mental breaking points. Mueller found himself pinned in a dried creek bed as opposition forces maneuvered to surround his position. His ammunition was running low, and the nearest cover was 60 meters away across open ground swept by multiple weapon systems. The tactical situation demanded a decision that would either advance him toward the objective or end his participation permanently. "I'm making a run for the ridgeline," he transmitted, choosing action over gradual elimination. His sprint across the open ground drew immediate fire, but his timing and route selection were perfect. Bullets cracked past his head as he dove behind a boulder, breathing heavily, but alive. Chen had linked up with Torres, creating a 2-person team that could provide mutual support. Together, they identified a weakness in the opposition deployment, a gap between positions that could be exploited if they moved with perfect timing and coordination. The risk was enormous, but remaining stationary meant eventual elimination. "On my mark," Torres whispered, checking his weapon one final time. "We move fast, we move smart, and we don't look back." Chen nodded, understanding that their survival depended on executing this movement flawlessly under extreme pressure. Their dash across the exposed ground lasted only 30 seconds, but felt like hours. Opposition fire erupted from multiple positions, but their route selection and speed carried them to safety behind a rock formation. They had penetrated the first layer of defenses, but 12 more miles remained. Volkov chose a different approach, using his Spetsnaz training to become invisible rather than fast. He moved during opposition weapon reloads during wind gusts that masked sound during any moment when their attention might be divided. His progress was slow, but steady covering ground without drawing fire. The psychological evaluation teams monitored everything, noting stress indicators that might signal impending breakdown. Heart rate monitors showed dangerous spikes, but remained within acceptable parameters. Brainwave analysis revealed extreme stress, but no signs of permanent damage. The participants were reaching their limits but hadn't crossed them yet. By hour 12, only 18 participants remained active in the gauntlet. The opposition force had eliminated 12 through a combination of wounds, psychological breakdown, and tactical errors. Those who survived showed the qualities that separated elite soldiers from exceptional ones: adaptability under extreme pressure, and the ability to function when everything seemed impossible. The final objective appeared as the sun began to set: a communications facility that needed to be destroyed to complete the gauntlet phase. But the opposition force had concentrated their remaining strength around this target, creating a defensive position that seemed impenetrable. Chen studied the facility through her scope, counting at least 15 defenders with multiple weapon systems in prepared positions. A direct assault would be suicide, but any other approach would take time they didn't have. The tactical problem required creativity rather than courage. Mueller had reached the same conclusion from his position on the eastern flank. The opposition expected a conventional military assault, but unconventional thinking might create opportunities that traditional tactics couldn't exploit. He began moving toward what appeared to be a weakness in their defensive plan. Volkov identified the power supply for the communications equipment, a vulnerable point that could be attacked without engaging the main defensive positions. If he could eliminate the power source, the facility would be neutralized without requiring a direct assault. On prepared positions, Torres and Chen coordinated their approach, recognizing that success required multiple simultaneous actions that would overwhelm the opposition's ability to respond effectively. They would create chaos and exploit the confusion rather than engaging. In a direct firefight, they couldn't win. The final assault began at sunset, when visibility favored the attackers. Multiple explosions erupted simultaneously as participants struck power lines, communications cables, and supply points. The opposition force found their defensive plan dissolving into chaos as attacks came from unexpected directions. In the confusion, 3 participants reached the communications facility simultaneously. The opposition force responded desperately, but their defensive positions had been compromised. The explosions that destroyed the communications facility marked the end of the gauntlet phase. 18 elite soldiers had survived 15 miles of desert terrain, live ammunition, and professional opposition forces. But their ordeal was far from over. The psychological warfare phase would begin, immediately testing their mental resilience. When they were already exhausted, Master Sergeant Morrison watched the survivors assemble their faces, showing the strain of 12 hours under constant threat. They had proven they could function under extreme physical stress, but breaking point would test whether their minds could endure when their bodies were already pushed beyond normal limits. Phase 2 begins now, Morrison announced, as the survivors were loaded into vehicles that would transport them to a facility designed specifically for psychological warfare. Sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and interrogation techniques that would push their mental resilience to the breaking point. The 18 survivors had passed the first test, proving they possessed the physical skills and tactical thinking necessary for elite operations. But the next 48 hours would determine whether they had the mental toughness to function. When everything familiar was stripped away and their deepest fears were systematically exploited, as the vehicles disappeared into the desert night, carrying the survivors toward their next ordeal, Morrison made notes on their performance. The gauntlet had eliminated those who lacked either the tactical skills or mental resilience for extreme operations. Those who remained would face challenges that would test the very core of their identity as warriors. The most dangerous military training exercise in the world was only beginning to reveal its true nature. The physical challenges of the gauntlet had been designed to exhaust and stress the participants, but the psychological warfare of breaking point would attack their minds when they were most vulnerable. In the distance, the lights of the psychological warfare facility waited like a beacon, calling the survivors toward the next phase of their transformation from elite soldiers into something beyond ordinary human capabilities. Only the strongest minds would survive what came next, and even fewer would emerge unchanged from the crucible that would test everything they thought they knew about themselves.
Hit subscribe and keep watching. More stories waiting for you. Tap the video on screen. Just click and enjoy.